Have you ever had trouble getting your child off to sleep? If you have, you're not alone. Maybe you're thinking a bit of TV will help them wind down, or perhaps a bit of exercise will wear them out. Maybe you've got a teenager who won't get up in the morning. Are they just lazy? I'm Dr Anthea Rhodes, paediatrician and host of the Kids Health Info podcast. To answer all these questions and more information about sleep that's critical to all of our health and wellbeing, today we're joined by our sleep expert and paediatrician, Dr Moya Vandeleur. Welcome, Moya.
Hi, Anthea.
Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here.
From the Royal Children's Hospital, Melbourne, this is the Kids Health Info podcast.
First up, let's talk about the types of problems kids have with sleep. So in our child health poll, we found almost half of children have some sort of trouble with sleep, and around a quarter in particular trouble getting off to sleep. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't, Anthea. So we know that healthy children have sleep issues. It's really common. I guess in terms of the types of problems that we see, often it's about getting to sleep. So my child can't get off to sleep and then staying asleep. So a lot of parents will have concerns about night wakings or getting up too early. So I think for otherwise healthy children that don't have medical conditions, it's really common to have issues around sleep in the family.
Trouble getting off to sleep, we sometimes hear, can be to do with sleep hygiene or sleep habits. Can you tell parents listening what is that and how might they change things up to help their child getting off to sleep?
Sleep hygiene simply refers to good sleep habits. Sleep hygiene can mean different things at different ages, and obviously families need to adapt these to suit their own family routine. But in essence, having a clear bedtime with a consistent sleep schedule, if you like, so bedtime and wake time is really important. So we know that children that go to bed within about 20 minutes of the same time each night and then wake up the next morning are more likely to be getting enough sleep and to have good quality sleep. So a bedtime's really important. Having a good sort of pre-bed routine is really important as well. So something that helps the child to relax and be ready to go off to sleep. So again, that's going to be different for each child and depending on the child's age. So for younger children, that might mean having a set number of stories, or I guess it can be listening to relaxing music, and perhaps for older kids, reading before bed, a meditation, music, anything that's relaxing is important. I guess if there have been struggles with bedtime, then it's important to talk about changes in routine before you actually get to bedtime. So setting those things up and having the conversation about the importance of getting enough sleep during the day rather than negotiating at bedtime is important. I guess other general things are to avoid any sort of activity that's stimulating before bed. So things like screens that can sort of make children feel a bit more wired. Anything sort of lots of vigorous activity or exercise before bed can be another thing that can stimulate kids and help them and I guess prevent them from winding down properly at night. Having a quiet, dark room is important. I guess coming back to sort of stimulating activities, not having screens in the room at bedtime and overnight can be really important, particularly for older teenagers, because we know that screens emit light. They can make it difficult to get off to sleep. And can be quite tempting for older kids to have in the room at night.
What would your tips be for parents if they think, right, what am I going to do differently?
So in sleep clinic, we often hear teenagers say, but I need my phone in my room because it's my alarm clock. So I guess then thinking of, well, let's get an alarm clock that's not your phone. And what helps a lot of families is actually removing the phone from the room or other screens from the room of all children in the house.
And parents as well, perhaps?
And parents as well, that's right. There's a lot of conversations about, but you do it, this is unfair. But having a sort of central docking station perhaps in the kitchen or rather than leaving those devices in the room.
Great
it just
advice.
Removes temptation.
Thank you. So onto a different topic now. Something else that came out in our recent study was the idea of caffeine. So as adults, I know I'm looking for my morning coffee and I'm aware that perhaps if I have something later in the day, it might affect me getting off to sleep. What about for school-aged kids, so primary school right through to teenagers? What role does caffeine have with sleep problems?
Exactly the same as the effect that it has on you. I guess we see the same thing in children. So caffeine is a chemical that's a stimulant. stimulant and arouses the brain and can make it difficult for people to get off to sleep. And often the body metabolises it quite slowly. So you really need to have your last caffeine-containing drink or food a good 6 hours before bed, and that can be different for everybody. So generally we say nothing after lunch. The other thing is a lot of people think of caffeine as only being in coffee or perhaps, cola drinks, but actually caffeine's found in lots of different foods and drinks that young people consume. So energy drinks, it's worth having a look at the label because a lot of energy drinks have caffeine. Chocolate desserts, but also other sort of beverages that people might think are healthy, so green tea, matcha, that sort of thing, and just usual tea. So all of those products actually contain caffeine, so it's important to think about what your child's drinking and eating. There have been surveys of Australian children that show that surprisingly high number of children, or teenagers rather, consume regularly caffeinated energy drinks. So I think that's a key one for teenagers and parents of teenagers to think about.
Another thing we found in the study is an idea that parents feel perhaps their teenagers are lazy or maybe they don't need all this sleep, particularly sleeping in on the weekends. Can you tell us a bit more about teen sleep specifically, and also maybe answer that question of, is it a good idea to catch up with a bit of extra sleep on the weekend, maybe have a slightly later night, Friday and Saturday, or, should kids be getting up, even teenagers, regardless, to keep that regular body clock going?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot in this. So I guess the first thing to start with is that teenagers are not lazy. They're just trying to get enough sleep. At puberty, your body clock starts to change. They won't feel sleepy until later. So they'll want to stay up later and sleep in later naturally because your body is smart. It wants to get enough sleep. So I think the way we try and support them to do that is by looking at what their wake time is during the week. So what time do they need to get up for school, and work backwards. So obviously if they're needing to get up at 6 o'clock to go to sport or catch the school bus, they need to be asleep by 10. And so just looking at that, looking at their schedule and how they can fit the things in that they need to do but still get enough sleep is really important. One of the other things you asked me about, was that idea of catch-up sleep. What we know is that children and teenagers are far more likely to get off to sleep easily and get enough sleep if they're going to bed at a regular time during the week. And I know that's really tricky with social activities, and naturally kids want to stay up later on Friday and Saturday nights. And the last thing to say is that catch-up naps are not helpful.
Okay. So a quiet nap on the couch during the day, not a good idea?
Not a great idea, because what it does is it sort of reduces your natural sleep drive when you go to bed at night. So if you're coming home from school having a bit of a nap, it makes sense that you probably won't be tired again till much later. And then the knock-on effect is, you go to bed, you go to sleep late, and then you have to wake up early because of the school start time, and you're not getting enough sleep. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle.
So consistency is really key by the sound of it. You mentioned exercise. I think it might be worth a quick chat on that. So often teenagers are doing sports training or things in the evening, and for younger children it might be a bit easier to keep that exercise to earlier in the day. How much of a difference is that really going to make? Well,
the first thing is we know that getting regular exercise is really important for wellbeing and health. So that should be supported and encouraged. We also know that specifically for sleep, getting regular exercise improves sleep quality. So exercise is important. I guess the caveat is that exercise close to bedtime can be stimulating. Ideally, exercise not closer than an hour to bed. Some recommendations would say 3 hours. So it's what's practical, but keeping that in mind. And I think it's obviously more of an issue for kids who actually have trouble getting to sleep. So if you've got a child who just hits a pillow and they're out, then it's less of an issue.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And I think that's important across all things. So if your child's not having trouble getting to sleep, even if they don't have perfect sleep hygiene or habits, do you need to worry about changing things?
I think provided they're getting enough sleep, then perhaps some of those tips about sleep hygiene are less important. The one thing I would say though is coming back to the idea of screens. And we know that young people that have screens in their rooms overnight are more likely to be involved in or the target of cyberbullying. There are other important factors, I think, to keep in mind when it comes to screens and screen use.
Lots of good reasons why screens out of the bedroom at night is a healthy choice for kids.
Yeah.
And so perhaps segueing then into one last topic, sometimes we know that kids have trouble getting off to sleep for other reasons, more than perhaps just their hygiene or habits, but it might in fact relate to their mood or mental health. Often children have worries that might impact them getting off to sleep. What's your advice there?
It's a really important topic. I think so for younger children, it can be quite natural if there are worries for bedtime to be I guess the time that it comes up. And certainly for children of all ages, if they're having trouble getting to sleep, checking in with your child about, whether there might be things that they're thinking about, ruminating on at night or in bed is really important, because that can be an opportunity to better understand that. And we've got some good tips actually with the kids' health information. There's some nice tips if parents are looking for more information about that. If your child does have anxiety or issues with their mood, it's obviously really important to get more specialised support and help with that. And so the GP is a really good, obviously resource for a medical check-in. There are sleep psychologists and obviously psychologists who would be appropriate as well.
Really important advice there, particularly around mental health, Moya, and seeking help. And of course, a reminder that today we've really just talked about trouble getting off to sleep or perhaps getting enough hours of sleep, but children may also have other troubles with their quality of sleep. So if parents are having concerns about snoring, or perhaps their child continues to be excessively tired during the day, then they should see their GP for review for some of those other medical problems that can crop up. So thank you so much for joining us. Lots of helpful tips there, and hopefully we can help parents and kids get more rest and all the benefits that flow from that for everyone. Thanks, Moya.
Thanks, Anthea.
Information in this podcast is general in nature and is intended to support, not replace, discussions with your doctor or healthcare professional. If you have concerns about your child, please consult your local healthcare professional for individual advice. This podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their elders. Kids Health Info is funded thanks to the support of the Royal Children's Hospital Good Friday Appeal.